Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. Welcome to the Frontline Innovators podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and I've got another great episode lined up for today. Our guest has over 20 years of experience with retail, specifically in learning and development and HR. He is currently the Director of Learning and Development at Bloomingdale's. Please welcome to the show, Stephen Vellecca. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Justin. Thank you for having me on.
So excited to have you. We had a fantastic prep call, and I'm dying to dive into some of those topics with you further. But I want to get started and ask you what you think is the biggest challenge facing the deskless workforce today.
So I think the biggest challenge, and forgive me if I refer to them as the hourly frontline colleague, so I'll try to remember that we're calling them the deskless, but same.
As long as we're being respectful, we can refer to them however you'd like.
But yeah, in my industry, we refer to them as our hourly colleagues or our frontline workers because they are working directly with the customers. So I think, especially now, today, after these last few years of turmoil in our country, whether it's social unrest, political unrest, a pandemic, I think the role of the frontline worker has become that much more difficult. And I think because of where we are in a society, I think the role is a lot more demanding. So what they face every day, we don't experience as much on the corporate side because we're not interacting with the public. So that's one challenge. And I think our other challenge, which remains constant throughout, is how we reach that group of people, because they don't have the ability to walk off the floor, sit at a computer, take a course, because they're hourly workers. So there are different rules that apply to them, and their livelihood is based on their time on the selling floor. So when I look at retail, the service industry, the hospitality industry, the airline industry, I think we're all in this together with where we've moved in these last 3 years as a culture and the challenges they face.
Yeah. I love that you combined a lot of the industries that we focus on here in this podcast, with hospitality, airlines, certainly a lot of workers that, as you said, are interacting directly with the public, and their roles are often evaluated by the tasks that they're completing, the interactions that they're having with those customers. And I think oftentimes they are not given the space or the time to do a lot of the other things that are really essential for their role, like learning.
Right. I agree. And I think in these industries that I listed, we all took a break for a while, a forced break with the shutdowns. And when I think people are still suffering from that, and it was a lot of ground to make up. When you're a corporate worker and you're salaried, and whether you were furloughed or not, you still always have that guaranteed income. I think when you're an hourly worker and you're shut down, unless you were deemed essential, and my industry wasn't deemed essential, so our hourly workers were shut down for about 3 months, depending on the store. But then when they opened up, they returned to this climate we're in. So I think when you're just, you just didn't return to normal. You had to return to what we're calling that new normal and re-navigate how you accomplished your role and how you drove your income, especially if you're an hourly worker on commission, because everyone just didn't run back to our stores. I mean, it took a little time, but shopping patterns have changed, a shift to online, because listen, we spent 3 months at home and we did not suffer from not being able to buy anything we needed. So
no, for sure.
That's a whole new upskilling of our teams that we're facing.
Yeah. And I think in retail in particular, it forced such technological change and then also a required behavior change by all of the associates that were affected by that. Right. And these were things, I find so fascinating. I think retail is probably one of the areas that this impacted most, is that these technologies aren't necessarily new.
Right.
The handheld devices that you're using have been around for decades,
Right.
and the capability of deploying software to those devices, and a lot of those things that happened were really possible many years ago.
Yes.
But man, did the pandemic just accelerate the pace of some of those changes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
curbside pickup and things like that, buy online,
Absolutely.
pick up in store, that kind of stuff. Like, these are things and capabilities. Some retailers had put some of those things in place before, but the volume of the business that was happening through those technologies just required such a rapid behavior change. Can you just, I want to give the audience a little bit about your background, but
Sure.
I'd love to just dive into that piece just a little bit. Like, the speed of change, did you experience that in your organization, and how did that affect you and your teams?
Yeah, I think every retail organization experienced the need to change quickly, the need to adapt. And I think, not speaking on behalf of Bloomingdale, just speaking on retail in general, throughout that year or 2 years of the pandemic, you saw so many retailers close that weren't strong, that weren't relevant, or that weren't adapting. And I think strong stores today move very quickly to adapt these programs. And I think that's some of the benefits of, I mean, it's very hard to say a pandemic, there were great things about it, but what I think it did was forced everyone to think differently, try new programs, try new ways of selling. Because at the end of the day, the hourly worker or the deskless colleague relies on customer business to drive their income.
Yep.
And without if I'm just talking on the store side, the .com business explodes. But ultimately, if you choose a career in retail, or you choose a career on a flight attendant or a hotel worker, you're relying on people walking through your doors.
Yep.
And I had to adapt how to approach your role differently. And that ties back to the education piece. So how do we reskill the hourly colleague that we can't pull into a classroom? The corporate office is simple. I could take an hour course out of the day, and my boss is going to be fine with it. I have that ability to do that. Hourly colleague, they can't do it on their own time, and they can't do it while they're working. So I think that's the challenge that I face every day, is how do I provide bite-sized information that's interactive, that's engaging, that's virtual real life, so that the hourly colleague or the deskless worker could still learn, but in a bite-sized format that's relevant.
All right. I want to come back to a couple of those things, but I want to let the audience know who they're hearing from. So tell us how you ended up in the role that you're in today. Give us a little bit about your history and some of the important milestones throughout that journey.
Sure. Well, I know it's unique to say I've been with a company for 24 plus years.
It is.
And I think as I reflect back on my career, the reason why it's been as long as it has been, and I've been so loyal to a brand, is that my role has always evolved. And I think that's part of what I've always loved about the culture. I think the first 15 years I was on the corporate side, and I had learning and development under my area of responsibility. But I had decided I just need to change this up. And I wanted to gain generalist experience and learn more about HR law and learn more about the different functions. And I didn't want to just be pigeonholed in learning and development. But in order to do that, I felt the most rewarding and fulfilling way, and probably the most challenging way, was to leave the corporate office and transition to the store environment, where the majority of the people I would be responsible for from an HR perspective would be the deskless worker, the hourly colleague. And there was a lot of reasons for that. And primarily the reasons would be the challenges that I believe the hourly colleague experience in life is different than a corporate office in New York City. And whether it's a group of people that is highly more diverse, different from a economic background, and also different from the experiences they face with being customer facing. So all of these different reasons or exposures is what led me to, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this this way and go into the stores field. So I spent about 1.5 years in South Florida, and that's where I gained my first exposure as a generalist in a store. And then from there, I was asked to come back, and I went to our flagship. And that was a whole new set of learning. So to be in a flagship with 2,000 hourly colleagues that were union, I felt this was really going to up my game from a learning perspective and from a challenge perspective. And it was probably the 3 most rewarding years I've had out of my 24 being in our flagship, just from what I've learned.
Are you saying a single store has 2,000 employees? Holy smokes.
Yeah.
I had no idea
Yeah.
that it would be that many people in a single store.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, yeah.
insane. Wow.
So that was probably, that was a great learning experience. And I think that's where I learned the most with regard to not only just why unions are in place, or it just was a educational experience to really learn all the different facets of HR law. And then this role opened up right before the pandemic, and I thought, well, now I could take 5 years of living it. So I thought the 5 years experience gained working directly in our stores with deskless workers, I'd be able to now be responsible for the education and the development they're receiving. So it was sort of perfect universe giving me this role. So now I focus on the development of the colleague end-to-end experience for our professional colleagues and for our hourly colleagues.
Fantastic. You mentioned before one of the challenges with being an hourly worker is they can't train on the job and they can't train off the job. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think depending on there are definitely companies that will have their colleagues spend 6 weeks in a training program off the floor. Like if I looked at a Louis Vuitton, that's their approach. We don't have the ability to do that. A lot of retailers don't have the ability to do that. So when I look at different groups I'm part of, and I hear and I listen and I learn from other learning and development industry experts, some companies have gone directly to e-learning. So the entire onboarding experience is a human sitting in front of a computer. I don't believe in that. I believe there's a balance. So I believe in e-learning provides an education equity so that if you're a part-timer or a full-timer, you're a professional, you're an hourly, you're receiving the same level of education. And that to me is what's fair. And that to me is the way we should always approach it. Just because you're part-time doesn't mean you should receive a scaled down version of what your role is.
Yeah.
The challenge, though, is from an ongoing education standpoint. So we have flexibility. I think most retailers have flexibility on how they want to onboard. It's the ongoing education. How do I continue to grow and develop and sharpen a person's skills when they're customer facing and on the floor? So they don't have the ability to, I mean, we could say, I'll take you off the floor for an hour and provide you this training. Well, but then I have to determine, well, how now is the floor covered by taking this person off the floor? If this person is commissioned, how do I figure out how to pay them a non-sell? Do they want to be off the floor for an hour? Because they might have client appointments. So there's all of these different logistics that face us with regard to educating the hourly associate colleague. Then on the other side of it is we can't ever ask somebody to do something off the job. So when you mentioned
clock,
right,
yeah.
So when you mentioned all the technology and the handheld and the apps, we don't have the ability to say, hey, Justin, on your smartphone, download this app because this is how I'm going to provide you ongoing education. What's your personal device? And I can't do that. Could they voluntarily do something like that? Perhaps. But then there's this whole idea of, am I encouraging this person to learn off work time? So the laws that protect our hourly colleagues for good reason, and those laws have been put into place because of companies that I think have taken advantage of that sector of people. Right. So we just have a lot more to navigate with regard to. So my whole platform is always about the people leader. And how do we leverage our people leaders to provide the inspiration and the education of the hourly colleague?
So how do you What's their role? What do you think is the role of the people leaders as it relates? Because I'm thinking about this kind of tugging in both directions, right? We've
Right.
got e-learning content over here, which is
Correct.
often designed to be self,
Self-led.
self-led, and then we've got people leaders on the other side. So how do you see the scenario where those things are blended together?
That's corny. And you've heard me say this before, but it's this activation e-learning or activation education and reinforcing. E-learning does not take the place of human connection. I think e-learning is an incredible platform. The advancements with some of these vendors I work with, or they're pitching me these artificial intelligence. It's so real life, and I've learned to create as much as I can in e-learning. The challenge is always still going to be the execution of it, because I do think a person can learn from an interactive e-learning that has proficiency checks and that has real life scenarios where they have to select the right path to move forward. So I do think it offers an experience and retention if done well. How do you bring it to life? How is it interpreted for your individual personality? I think the role of the people leader, like Justin, if you were to take a course and I was to take a course, well, I might bring it to life in an entirely different way because of my personality versus you. And that doesn't mean one is right or what's wrong. But in the framework of the brand, what's the expectation of now you took this e-learning, how do you bring it to life on the floor with the customer? And I think that's the role of the people leader. So the people leader to me is the most important. If you sign up to be a people leader, you're signing up for a lot of responsibility, because the role you play, and I've seen this over and over, the role you play in someone's life, it can be life-changing for the good or for the bad, depending on the type of leader you are. So I think where the e-learning starts is with the people leader understanding the vision, understanding the purpose, understanding what the e-learning is going to provide, and then setting that tone with the colleague. And before the colleague even sits down at a computer, they're bought into, this is why I'm going to spend a half an hour of my time off the sales floor learning about this. And the benefit to me, or we call it the WIFM, what's in it for me, is when I emerge from this, it's going to lead to X, Y, and Z. And that's, to me, that I premise everything on the people leader's biggest role is to provide the why, provide the vision, gain the buy-in. And then after the colleague takes it, it's not like you just, okay, poof, Justin's an expert now in this. It's now the people leader circling back and saying, so walk me through. What did you get from it? What did you like about it? What were some of the challenges? Let's talk about how we're going to apply it now in your role. How can I support you? So bookends.
Do you think there are perhaps limitations to the types of learning that can be done through e-learning tools? For example, just very high level, and to oversimplify my question to say, hard skills, task-based things optimized for e-learning, soft skills, how to interact with the customer, some of those other things that would be important that may not be optimized for e-learning. Are there breakpoints in your mind about where we should divide that experience for the learner?
It's a great question. It's a great question. And I think we face that more now as e-learning becomes more of a part of my role and what I'm creating. I think it's funny. I just had a conversation with a couple leaders because I happen to be writing a new program that 90% of it is behavioral. And there's a strategy piece, and then I'm supposed to take the strategy and now make it behavioral. And I think you hit it right on the nose. What's that balance? So I think e-learning is important and critical for retention of knowledge. So when you're looking at taking a compliance course about safety, or a compliance course about, sadly, about active shooting, those things are drilled into your head through all the different scenarios you go to, and you're going to remember that. When it comes to behavior and the art of conversation and the art of humanity and interacting, I think e-learning can provide examples, and I think it can provide thought-provoking, ideas on on developing those skills, but ultimately that to me is the role of the people leader, because that's going to be different for you. So if I did a course on the art of conversation, the 5 steps of being a great conversationalist, okay, I might remember those 5 steps, but when I'm interacting with you, Justin, I'm not going to say, oh, first, did I open with this conversation starter? Did I ask Justin how his day was? Those are all just steps. How I bring it to life, it has to be uniquely Stephen, or it has to be uniquely Justin.
Right.
And that's the role of the coach.
Yeah. I spoke with a retailer once. I won't mention any proper names, but about our systems training technology in my day job. And they were struggling with a handheld application that they needed their frontline workers to use. But as we really did the discovery with this organization, what we really found was that it had nothing to do with how the users were interacting with the application or the handheld device. It had everything to do with how the frontline worker was interacting with their customers. And the challenge that they were having was that the people were interacting too much with the technology and not making eye contact and not greeting the guest and things like that. Right. And they were doing things that, sound so innocent, but they were basically asking for a guest's mobile number.
Yeah.
And there was a reason for this, because they were going to be putting them into a queue capability where they were going to then text them when it was their turn and all that kind of stuff. So it was a very innocent request, and it was actually going to help the customer. The problem wasn't how do you type in the mobile number into the app. That part was actually pretty simple, but it was about how do you interact with the customer during that exchange. Somebody's just walked up and you say, hey, give me your mobile number. And I'm like, I'm not giving you my mobile number, right?
It's all how you ask, right?
Yeah. So there was just a ton of it. This had nothing to do with technology adoption, which is really our sweet spot. But what it made me realize is that there are so many elements to that interaction between the employee and your customer, and you get one chance to make a first impression.
Absolutely.
And really, this all was so pivotal for a quality customer experience, right? Because the whole reason that they were investing in this technology was to improve the customer experience, not to create awkward circumstances between their employers and customers, right? Or employees and customers. So anyway, it was really fascinating to me to just really think about the soft skills element, and then where technology can play a role in training for that. And I think you just said it perfectly. Like, I could give that employee the 5 steps to improving that interaction, but at some point, like, there's a human element of that's just going to require some oversight and coaching and some nurturing through that process that I'm not sure can be done through e-learning.
Yeah, and I think these advancements in e-learning, and I was working with a software company couple of weeks ago that said we can create an avatar based on you, and you would be this avatar. And I thought, we really have come a long way with artificial intelligence. Ultimately, as great as those experiences are, I still would always encourage the people leader has a big role in what did you learn, and let's talk about it now in real life.
Yeah. I think the one place that there's a combination approach is to extend the capabilities of the coach so that they can be virtually in more than one place at a time, right? So that some portions of this learning experience for a team of learners, like if we were just looking at a one-on-one scenario and you had one coach for every, employee in the organization, then you may not need technology to help you scale that. But in most cases, that's just not the case, right? So there's one coach for 10 or 15 employees, depending on the environment. And so some of these technology tools can allow them to achieve some scale where some portions of that content can be delivered in an appropriate form electronically, but then free them up to do the things that perhaps a human is most optimized for.
Yeah, I agree. I think the span of control for a people leader today is much higher than it was a few years ago. And as much as we talked about when we started, our discussion about what I thought the challenges are for the hourly colleague or the deskless worker with where we are as a culture and the different challenges that we face, it's that blurring of personal and professional. We used to be able to say, leave your problems at the door, and when you come in, put a smile on your face. I don't think we're necessarily in that world anymore, because when you think about, not to be a downer, but every day is an active shooter. That's now a reality in a public. If you work with a public, that is now a reality. That any day this could happen. So, that's a lot. That's a lot of anxiety to go to work, to think about, between what we face as just coming through the pandemic and all the other challenges. The active shooter situation is a daily occurrence in America. So when you're a people leader, not only do you face all of these because you're a deskless worker as well, you're just the leader of a team. You now have this group of people reporting to you. So the role of the people leader, in my eyes, has changed to be a lot more empathetic, not enabling, because I always make sure people understand the distinction between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this approach I try to always provide our people leaders with, when we're first engaging with our teams. Justin, it's not, Justin, what are you doing? It's, Justin, how are you doing? And let's talk about that first, because for you to be your authentic self, for you to deliver everything I'm expecting of you, you have to be okay. And you have to be in the game. And I think that's a people leader's number one role now, is their team, and ensuring their team is ready, is capable, and feels connected.
How do you delineate between enabling and being empathetic?
The way I look at it as being empathetic is having that sincerity and that genuine interest, and ability to listen, and that ability to do your best to understand. Enabling is allowing behavior based on what that person is feeling. So if you were to arrive at work, Justin, and I notice you're not performing, well, an empathetic leader is going to assume good intent. And they're going to say, let me check in on Justin, and let me do this without it feeling like a drive-by. Terrible expression, but
yeah,
I think you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Or I'm not going to be looking at my phone, or I'm not going to be distracted. I'm going to just sit eye to eye and say, Justin, what's going on? Here's what I've noticed. How can I support you? Enabling would be allowing your behavior to continue on the sales floor, because Justin's just going through it. So I get it if he's not being the most service oriented. I can't allow that because I'm still running a business, and you still have to be responsible. So my role as a people leader is going to say, how can I support you? Do you feel you could be here today, Justin? Because when we're on the floor, we have to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And if you're not up to that today, I completely understand. I'd rather have you take a day for yourself versus have you on the floor not being ready. That's the difference between empathy and enabling.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great explanation. And this podcast, which we basically started during the pandemic, has
captive audience.
For sure. For sure. It was either the best or the worst time to start a podcast. I'm not sure which. But I've learned from our guests this idea about all of the change that's impacting humans. And I've wrongly often thought about that as just change as it relates to work. But the pandemic and just all of the change that we've gone through has made me realize that all of us come to work and we have this, I'm just going to kind of call it baggage, right?
Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
dealing with change. We're dealing with wars around the world. We're dealing with other crises around the world. We're dealing with family things that are going on. When we have a school shooting and then we're sending our kids off to school, right. That stress is weighing on parents, whether their kid, was in that same school district or not, it doesn't matter. That stress is still weighing on people. And then we do expect all of us to come to work and be able to flip that switch. And so that's obviously just easier said than done. Yeah. I do appreciate something else that you said, though, which is that we do have a job to do. And for the customer that walks into your store or any other, interaction in a business, that's their first, perhaps maybe only interaction with our business, is that frontline worker. And so there is kind of an expectation that they be in a position to be on their game, right, all the time when they're customer facing. And I love your point that if you're not in a position to be on your game, then perhaps you should step out today. And but that requires an organization and a culture that's supportive of that and say, go take the rest of the day,
Right.
go back tomorrow with, fresh, and we'll figure out a way to fill in around you here.
Absolutely. And it's certainly not an easy thing to do. And especially when, but there's a risk versus reward piece.
Right.
Of it. 9 times out of 10, that colleague's going to say, I'm fine. They just needed, we never know as humans how much influence we have on another human by just stopping and listening. And when we slow down and a person provides another person with that moment, I bet a year's salary, 9 times out of 10, that colleague's going to feel much better than they did when they walked in. They felt heard. They felt validated. Their problems didn't go away, but they felt someone actually cared and listened. And they're going to go out there and they're going to have the best day that they've had. So 9 times out of 10, you're not saying, I don't think the person goes home. I think they just need to know that there's my people leader or someone that I work with had a moment. And honestly, customers, I think, are the same way. When I think about how, I think, retailers, hotelers, I think we are so not appreciated for the role that we play in people's lives, because so much of someone going into a store, getting on is escapism. And, so you have the ability to really just make an impact on anyone's lives. And I think if humans realize more, I know I'm going a little philosophical, this might be a different podcast. I just think if humans realize their individual power to have an impact in someone's life, I think we'd all treat each other a little differently.
Yeah, for sure. I had an experience just a week ago. My wife and I don't go out to dinner very often, but we happen to have just a spontaneous jump out to go check out a new restaurant in town. And we sat down and the wine that was delivered, it was not delivered by the waiter. It was delivered by, a runner who brought something out from the bar. And the wine glass was just completely dirty. And my wife just immediately, her reaction, I think we just had such big expectations about sitting down and we were really looking forward to just having a few minutes together and just enjoying this new place. And so like one of the first experiences we had sitting down at this restaurant was a crappy, dirty wine glass.
Right.
And so she got very frustrated quickly.
Okay.
So I didn't have my finger on her pulse, but I could read her heart rate going up, but this is a great example. The waiter came over and she was ready to fight him. And the guy said, this is completely unacceptable. I'm going to make this better right now. And immediately my wife's demeanor flipped around 180 degrees. And so I was just I was an observer, right? This was not.
You're like, I'm not getting involved.
Exactly. I'm not standing between my wife and her glass of wine on a Friday night.
But now you're like, bartender, can you bring me a shot? Because I'm already stressed out.
Exactly. But it was really interesting. And my wife and I talked about it. I didn't want to interrupt our dinner. So we had a fine dinner and everything was awesome from that point forward. But when we went outside, as we were walking back to the car, I said, there was an interesting interaction between you and the waiter when he came up. And I said, did you notice how your behavior changed? Like she couldn't say enough about the great service all of a sudden in this place. Right. And I just thought, gosh, that's such an amazing situation. That guy, there were 1,000 things he could have said at that moment.
Totally.
But man, he nailed it. And I don't know if that was just his personality or if he had been trained by that restaurant owner to handle situations like that, but to acknowledge how my wife probably felt. That's exactly what she was probably going to say, is that's unacceptable.
Absolutely.
And the fact that he got it out there before she did turned that situation around entirely. And I probably need to learn how to deal with my wife a little better with my own behavior sometimes. Honey, my behavior was unacceptable.
That's funny.
See if I could turn her as quickly. But anyway, it just made me realize there's how many interactions like that happen in retail and in other, frontline facing roles.
Every minute.
I thought that was just so interesting.
Well, there's two things that I'm going to observe. I observed in that story, and I love these types of scenarios because they're real life. So the two things I would pick out of that as a learning experience was, one, that colleague, the employee that took ownership immediately has a passion for what he does. Mm-hmm. And he's passionate about his work and he has an integrity and he owned it, which I think that's amazing. Like I would hire 1,000 of those types of people.
Right.
The other piece to this is part of what I try to instill in our people leaders is to assume good intent. So and your wife had every reason to be disappointed because, I mean, come on, I came to a restaurant. If I want, it wasn't personal and it wasn't intentional. Somewhere down the chain of command, someone didn't have that pride that waiter did, because they allowed that glass to get through the dishwashing, to the rack, to being stacked in a bar, to the waiter station. So all those things somewhere missed that chain. So to me, always assuming good intent it wasn't personal. Somewhere there was a breakdown. Now, had he come over and he not tell such a great ownership of it, yeah, I'd continue with being pretty disappointed and frustrated. So I always, that's one thing I always try to instill in people: assume good intent. So if you have 5 direct reports and 1 or 2 of them aren't performing or they're not getting it, so why? What's your role in it? And what's the block? Find the why. And we do that through the empathy skill. So I'm going to assume good intent. I'm going to assume Justin wants to succeed. Listen, I mean, I still have some faith in humanity that most of us want to do a good job. What's preventing us from doing a good job? Is it my connection to my people leader? We just don't have a good relationship. Am I not receiving the skills and the education I need? Is this role a wrong fit for me? Yeah. So that's the role of the people leader, to determine skill versus will, which is my other favorite expression.
Tell me about that.
Skill versus will. Mm-hmm. Skill versus will is, I have the ability to do it. I want to do it, but for some reason, something's blocking me. So when I look at determining, when I challenge a people leader to say, when you think about a skill versus will for this person that's not performing, walk me through that conversation to determine it. Because the skill piece of it is something's blocking their ability to do it. And you have to unearth what that is. So whether it's providing more education, whether it's providing more coaching, more one-on-one time. The will is, I have that ability, I just don't want to. I'm disengaged. And that's a problem, because when a person has the ability, but they're choosing not to, then it's up to that people leader to figure out what has disengaged this person, that when they're arriving to work, they don't want to deliver. And that could be a ton of reasons. It could be the wrong role. It could be a wrong connection with the people leader. This person might feel that the people leader favors other people and doesn't see this person. So identifying skill versus will is critical in the development of a team and developing performance.
Yeah. We're running short on time, but I realized that I didn't dig into something that I wanted to circle back around with you on. You talked about virtual reality and some of the other technologies, and we were kind of comparing and contrasting soft skills versus hard skills and things like that. Right. I'm curious to get your perspective on the future of the use of technology in the development of those soft skills. Okay. There are products right now that are simulating interactions with customers, that are able to listen to their voice and do sentiment analysis. I mean, this stuff exists right now. I don't think they're widely distributed across all industries today, but I mean, these technologies exist today. What's your take? You seem to just have such a close personal connection with the human side of these things. And I'm curious to get your take on where you think tech fits today and where you see it evolving to.
That's a great question. So I think it's going to continue to play a bigger role. I think in my dream world, if it's scaled down to this 5 minutes or less type virtual reality, I think the more realistic these e-learning platforms become, and I look at, I'm not a gamer, but people that are so into like the Sims or even this whole meta universe that Facebook's doing, I think that the more I can step into a virtual reality where my behavioral or soft skills, whatever we want to term it, have a immediate reaction that I can continue to practice in this virtual reality world, I think that's going to change the game. So right now, the platforms I'm using and that I've worked with vendors on is still, I'm choosing a path and I'm getting rewarded for the right answer. And I don't think a certification or a proficiency check does anything for behavioral skills. If I could step into an augmented reality where the only way to navigate is by me interacting with you, Justin, to move me further, I think that's going to be practice. It's like learning a new language. It's repetition. That's what I think starts to change behavioral skills. I don't know if we're there yet. I'm sure we are there yet. I don't think we have the budget for it yet. But I think the more that becomes scalable and reachable, but it still won't take away the role of a people leader to set this up with the vision and the why for me to want to go through it. And then when I come out of training, that people leader is reinforcing what I'm doing or redirecting what I might not be doing. And we're aligned.
Yeah. I wonder if that's the opportunity for organizations there's still a role for people leaders, and the people, the humans in the business are still going to need to set the rules for VR, and any of the technology is still being built by and for humans. Right. So there's still an important role to figure out, like, what do we want these interactions to even be like? But like we were talking about before, with just some of the other current e-learning technologies now, perhaps giving those coaches and mentors the ability to, amplify their impact by being, having asynchronous learning opportunities for the people in their organization that can be augmented by their actual human-to-human mentorship. I wonder if VR technologies will start to shift that line further and further over to, more use of tech versus less mentor.
I wonder. I don't know. I think the advancements are amazing, and I don't know if Facebook could launch a universe where people live in a virtual, like, scary as that might be, because I think we need more human interaction and not virtual interaction. I think if we continue to also focus on the role of a coach, I think the e-learning will play a role in that education equity. Everyone receives the same experience, the same exposure, the same opportunity. I think the more we can sharpen what it means to be a leader of people, and a person who signs up to be a leader of people, they feel it. I'm pointing to my heart, even that's on a podcast, but they feel it here. That's why that's why they chose this role. Otherwise, you'd be an individual contributor, and that's fine too. You might not want direct reports.
Right.
But if you sign up to lead people, you're signing up for a whole new level of responsibility, because I'm now responsible. Just if you report to me, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for your success. And I'm hoping I'm going to make your life better than how I found you, by growing you and making you more successful, or achieving your goals with you. But I have to feel like fulfilled by that. And, to me, that's the skill of a people leader.
Yeah.
And the power of a people leader.
I find myself conflicted on this because I'm a guy who really enjoys technology. I've built my entire career, and lots of my personal life are around technology. I really enjoy learning about and implementing new tech in all facets of my life and my career. At the same time, I'm also a people person that cherishes human interaction. And so I'm curious to see where this evolution happens. I'm fortunate. I've got a 19-year-old son, and I'm very fortunate that my son would give up his technology in a blink of an eye to have real world experiences. He'd rather go to a concert. He'd rather go do things outdoors. He'd rather go mountain biking than sit behind, games. And I'm just very lucky that I'm not, kind of battling what I know a lot of other parents are battling there.
Yeah, that's smart. That's an amazing, that's a insightful kid.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate about that. He likes technology too. And he does, mess around. He's got a VR headset that he got this summer that he's messing around with. So he definitely has those experiences too, but he would drop that headset in a minute to go, see an event somewhere live. So I look at how he's growing up, and I say, well, he's growing up in the same world around a lot of other kids who their parents tell me they can't pull them away from their Xbox. And I don't know if we've done something different or if we just got lucky, just, in terms of how his DNA is. But I think about the future, and I think about, how those interactions are going to continue to happen between the team members that you support today and your customers. I mean, let's face it, this metaverse thing, some of your physical store presence could be replaced.
I know.
In the metaverse, right?
It's
so
I'm shaking my head in disbelief that this is where we are going, in knowing that we already have a challenge in this country, world, wherever, dealing with each other as humans, and now we're making it more virtual.
Yeah.
But to what you said before that you're so passionate about, listen, I think technology is so important. It's how we use it. And just hearing your excitement about what you create with technology, and you're providing the why for why it's going to benefit someone. But the example you gave before about it's not just saying, hey, let me have your phone number so I can put it in my phone. You have to say, here's the tool, and this is what the tool is going to give you. But let's not lose the human factor of understanding why I have to ask for your phone number and the benefit to you as a customer. That's the piece where I come in. So I take what you create and I put the behaviors around it, because no matter what direction we're looking at, we have to provide the why.
Yeah. It's a great place for us to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a fantastic conversation. There were a bunch of topics that we really didn't get a chance to explore further. So we may have to have you on another podcast someday.
Absolutely. Anytime. I think this was a great, it fuels me. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I'm glad. And we're looking forward to having you join us. A lot of our audience have heard me talk about the Frontline Innovators Council, and we invite all of our podcast guests to come and participate. So we have about 80 members in the Frontline Innovator Council now. And we host a monthly meeting where we just bring together all of the former podcast guests and the hosts, and we just have an informal monthly conversation. So looking forward to having you come and join us in that. Absolutely. And staying in touch with you.
I look forward to it. And Justin, thank you very much.
Excellent. To our audience, we do need to wrap it up there. I hope you found this conversation as enjoyable as I have. It's been a great discussion with Stephen today. We could really use your help. Please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are out there innovating on the front lines. And a reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the mobile digital adoption platform for deskless and frontline workers. Visit the website at skyllful.com. Thank you very much for your time today. And Stephen, we'll see you again soon.
All right, Justin. Thank you.